All right, thank you.
So, hi guys. Sorry for the technical delay. Firstly, truly, absolutely epic to be back for a third year, opening up with yet again another history talk. I promise you that this is the last one that I'm doing for a while. I don't want to get typecasted as a historian, although I think it's a little bit too late for that, right? We'll let history tell. So, firstly, I say this to you guys every single year. I must say it again. You should really give a round of applause to the SecT organizers, right? Because they are one of the best ran and organized conferences that I've dealt with in probably a decade of speaking. So a big round of applause for the SecT people. Right, so who was here last year? Put your hands up. Right, we're going to carry on a little bit from where we are last year. Those that weren't here last year, yeah, it sucks to be you. So, I have had the fortune of talking about 3 modern-day problems from a historical context. So, when I first spoke to you guys, I spoke to you about the Manhattan Project and the similarities between 1950 theoretical physicists and cryptographers today and some of the issues that they're dealing with. I then spoke to you guys about state surveillance, but during the Reformation, the European Reformation, so state surveillance during the 1500s, because a lot of people find it hard to fathom that states have been spying for a lot longer than Edward Snowden's been alive, right? So, and this time, I'm going to talk about the evolution of privacy, the history of privacy. It's quite difficult, to say the very least. So this is me, this is f1nux. I am the stealer of cakes, apparently, right? I'm pretty sure that I should get to win some sort of award in the history category for the 3rd consecutive history talk at an InfoSec hacking conference, right? Just in case I'm the only Scot that you know, and that this is not a cultural thing for my people to come out and speak to your people about history. Just in case you know, don't expect every Scot to turn up and say, "Here, pal, I'm here for the history talk," eh? That's not going to happen. So, also, I'm doing a lightning talk, and this is when I actually do some security. I know it's hard for you guys to believe that I actually do security, but if you come to a lightning talk later on, you might see me actually do some for a change, right? So let's talk about the talk. I'm talking about the history, the evolution of privacy. Why? Well, because I love privacy, right? Like a lot of people. Privacy is kind of cool. Privacy is around in everything that we do. But I suppose, like a lot of you, my biggest fear is my search history being read out aloud. So you should confront your fears, and I should read my history. I'm only kidding. But for a lot of people, they are worried. There is a lot of intimate personal information that's out there that can be read by other people. It is also doubly interesting to talk about privacy in Sweden. Who knows, apart from the awesome picture, why I've put 1974 up there? You were one of the first countries to actually have a national data protection law. Not, you know, you are trailblazers. What's interesting, though, you're trailblazers in something else as well. What seems to be a regular occurring theme is that privacy laws are brought into effect a lot of the times out of the fear of what governments are doing. And in your own case in 1974, well, 1973, the law was enacted. It came into force in 1974. And inspired greatly by, surprise, surprise, mass surveillance from the state. Who would have thought it, right? And as I say, this is a recurring theme in a lot of laws that privacy is involved in. What I can tell you is most people keep on telling me that privacy is dead, which is quite interesting, because I tend to feel that you should be able to describe something that's dead, and I don't feel that I'm able to describe privacy that well. So let's try and define what privacy actually is. So let's ask Google, because of course Google will know. Yeah, thanks Google, you were really helpful. So basically Google, it's not about being observed by other people. Right, okay. I mean, sure, that's a general description of privacy, but does that describe what privacy is for you? I doubt it, right? Well, maybe we should ask the experts, because they'll know, right? So, uh, Arthur R. Miller, uh, ex yeah, thanks. It was very, very helpful. Um, this is quite a famous lawyer, if memory serves me. I've not got my notes, so I can't give you his job description, right? But Colin Bennett is a dean of the Harvard Law, was a dean at Harvard Law, same problem as well. This is probably the most dystopian description of privacy that I've ever read in my life, and I have read 1984 twice. Privacy is a value so complex, so entangled in competing and contradictory dimensions, so engorged that with various and distinctive meanings that I sometimes despair whether it can be usefully addressed at all. If this was ever a person that needed a hug. Okay. Well, Judith Jarvis Thomson, quite a famous philosopher, same thing. You're starting to notice there is a slight theme in these quotes, right? And let's ask the legend himself and Cerf. Privacy may actually be an anomaly. Cheers, Vince. However, this is really unfair. So put your hands up if you know who this guy is. Put your hands up if you've ever used a network. Right? Now he's like a technical evangelist at the puzzle factory that we call Google. But he's involved in TCP. He is a living legend in some ways. And he's in an FCC meeting. And of course, FCC meetings, right? The height of modern entertainment. Everybody wants to watch an FCC meeting, right? So, of course, it had these guys prepared for an FCC meeting of bureaucrats and expected no one to turn up. Vince turned up and basically said, yo, look, privacy's only been around for about 100 years. It's only really been around since the invention of the wall. Blah, 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 blah. It may just be an anomaly. And of course, the media lost its business, right? And off they went, Vince Cerf. But even this, I've given you 4 quotes from 4 legal or philosophical people in history that can't define it, whose very job was to defend privacy. Yay, thanks, experts. So, the UN. Okay, I'm going to people who do talks, right? I'm about to break a cardinal rule. And that cardinal rule is no more than 6 lines of text with no more than 6 words in a text, right? Because otherwise, you get a wall of text. For today, we're breaking that rule. So, but these are the rights through the UN that you can expect to have for your privacy, which is interesting because it's still very hard to describe what it is, but we have human rights associated with it. I'm not going to read it. If you want to look it up, do so and find it, right? Yeah, okay. Well, it turns out that animals aren't very good at recognizing the Human Rights Charter, and a little known fact is that's a trait that's shared by most governments. They don't recognize the Human Rights Charter either, and certainly not your privacy. This is the other part of the UN Charter on privacy that's specifically about the state, which is an absolute nightmare because it keeps on going on. Great. How's that working out for us, right? I think we're quite well spied on, quite well have our privacy taken away from us, which is quite strange because we tried really hard to describe what it is. So hands up if you know who Amber Rudd is. If you say UK Home Secretary, don't put your hand up, right? But this is a politician who is the Home Secretary. She is the replacement for Theresa May, right? And she's an idiot. Real people don't need encryption, which is handy, because I've got another quote for her, which is real Home Secretaries often prefer ease of access to personal information rather than a multitude of moral obligations to defend the law of the United Kingdom. But this is true, that Home Secretaries have always tried to circumvent the law in the UK. Always is a bit of a strong term, but I can show you historical points throughout history where our Home Secretary, who is responsible for upholding the laws in the United Kingdom, have consistently broken laws when it comes to privacy and human rights and privacy. So, yeah, the Supreme f1nux of f1nux stand says, get it right up, you Amber. Yay, Amber. But state surveillance is nothing new. If you were here last year, you know I've talked about it before. This is Honest Abe. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you who he is. Great proponent of civil rights when it boils down to it. This is a letter from the Homeland Secretary during the Lincoln administration, during the Civil War, asking for blanket abilities to tap the telegraph wires throughout the whole entire country. This is not Lincoln's writing. Lincoln's writing is the little bit right at the top that basically says, yeah, go for it. And that is nice. That is the oversight that was given to basically literally wiretapping Civil War America. Yay, I win the Goodwin's Law today. So, this quote is always something that gets played out in privacy talks, right? Because of course, Goebbels is the first person to say that, right? Yeah, no. This is Elizabeth I. Some people that were here last year. I love this, by the way. This is an Elizabethan statement that says if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? 500 years before Goebbels said it, and a little while before we've seen this being said time and time again. It's quite worrying because it does feel a lot like we're living in 1984, right? That if you've got nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. I mean, to be fair, H.G. Wells has also, as an author, H.G. Wells, separate author, has also been trying his very best to warn us of the impact of privacy. Just think about the message in The Invisible Man in 1987. And this continues going on. And this is written because of the fear of the printed press, of books, of cameras. They're not feared about, the book that is a camera that is an internet connection, right? He's not even writing that's not even in their realm yet. He's writing something like The Invisible Man. It's a very good book. You should read it. Yay, Edward Snowden, probably the best soundbite that we've had in the privacy war, right? And basically, hey, saying that you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear is like saying you don't need free speech because you've got nothing to say. Thankfully, someone came up with a soundbite that actually worked. But the problem is this is nice. It's a nice sum up of that situation. But the real problem that we have with the nothing to hide argument, and it's an argument, put your hands up if you've heard that argument said that if you've got nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Don't be shy, the rest of you. We know that you've heard it too, right? But the problem is its whole premise is fixated on the concept that privacy is only used to hide wrongdoing, that privacy can't be used for anything else, right? So nothing to hide, nothing to fear. Privacy is only about hiding wrongdoing. Really, it's akin to saying if you have nothing secret, you have nothing to fear. But privacy is far more evolved than just a notion of secrecy. We've come all this way, of all these slides, all this nice little chat, and I've still not been able to give you a clear definition of what privacy is. And mostly because the conceptualization of privacy, the actual the abstract notion of how we discuss privacy is incredibly hard, right? What? What I mean is that there's an interesting paper by a guy called Daniel Solov that talks about the taxonomy of privacy. And the whole paper is about trying to define what the term is of privacy. Because if we can't define what the term of privacy is, we can't defend. You can't protect what you can't describe. And he wrote this interesting paper where he says, look, we've looked at privacy, and in the end, there's no one tangible thing that is privacy. It's a collection of similar-minded things. Like, yay, thanks for that, because you made that really clear. But an example of that is something that is intimate isn't necessarily private. May be private, but something that's private may not be intimate. They share similar notions. Privacy, private, secret, intimate, all of these things share similar notions, but they can all live independently from each other. And it's very hard to be able to describe. If I asked you all, right? I'm not going to ask you all, don't worry, so you can sit on your hands, right? But if I asked each and every one of you to describe to me privacy in 3 words, I'm probably going to have 440 different words easily to describe privacy. You should do this yourself for the rest of the conference. You're having these conference chats. Ask people to tell you what they think privacy is. And you'll be surprised because you've taken it for granted that your notion of privacy is, of course, the same notion of privacy that everyone else has, right? But this doesn't seem to be the case. So where's the history? You've talked all this time and you've not talked about any history. So, well, the privacy's history is actually in our architecture. It's woven into the very fabric of how we live together. Privacy is an evolving thing. If we take privacy, it's in our laws as well, right? And it's also in our religion as well. I'll talk about these things in a little minute, okay? So the impact of urban living upon privacy is quite interesting. I'm not going to go and do some urban living planning talk, don't worry, right? We're just going to touch this. So this is kind of how we used to live. And we used to live in this sort of way because of shared resources, because of safety, because of security. Privacy always tends to take a back seat to other needs, right? It's quite strange. But the notion of privacy in a big hut where you all live together, you all sleep in the same space, the concept of having a quiet moment just doesn't exist because of a lack of opportunity to this. And as buildings develop, the fire plays such a pivotal role in bringing people together. As we can see, blah, 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 blah. But the invention of the fireplace changes internal architecture massively. And what this does is we see the invention of chimneys. And chimneys allow us to move smoke out of a property. Once we're able to move the smoke from the fire into the sky, we're able to start building internal walls, because otherwise you're going to choke people to death. So the invention of the fireplace has an impact on how we start to live together. And then all of a sudden, we go from fires to, Park Avenue. Don't get me wrong, there was a few steps along the way. They didn't just here's a fireplace, here's New York. But as you can see, as a species, we've gone from mud huts and fireplaces to bathrooms and bedrooms and single occupancy and so on and so forth in a reasonably small space of time. How we bathed was a public affair. It's quite interesting. Here's my German story for you, right? I'm a Scot that lives in Germany, and my girlfriend is forever telling me that I'm so very British. And I'm forever telling her that she's so very German. And this is a story that happened to me that highlights cultural awareness when it comes to privacy or intimacy. Intimacy, not quite, but privacy, definitely. So my girlfriend took me to a German sauna. And anyone who's been to a German sauna knows that this conversation's over with right now. Anyone who doesn't, we go to the German sauna, and I'm getting undressed, I'm down to my shorts, and I've got my towel, because don't forget, I'm a pasty Brit. And my girlfriend says to me, "Oh, you need to take your shorts off." And she didn't even get to the end of the sentence before I said, "No." "Oh, you need to be naked." "No. No." And she said it was one of the funniest things, because you could never have been more British at that moment. She's like, I didn't even get the words out. But this notion of a shared sauna and spa experience was just a little bit too much for me. But I'm brave. I took my clothes off, and I spent the rest of the day naked in a spa. What I realized is I'm doing a lot better than most people in Germany, right? So it wasn't too bad. But this was a public matter, bathing, so on and so forth, right? It's only later on when the water closet, when the bathroom, the internal plumbing happens, that we start to develop notions that I want to cleanse myself in privacy. Quite bizarre. The Roman attitude towards sex was incredibly different to our attitude towards sex. Christianization had an impact on how we had intimacy with each other. Beforehand, it's a public affair. Also, if there is ever a wall anywhere, no matter what period of time, there is always someone who's going to write on it. Romans being tagged, right? I mean, okay, cool. But you can see how the Romans regarded what we consider a very intimate act, a very public act. And if you're interested in the impact of architecture in privacy, Rome is a very good place to look as well, because there's a huge difference between how Greece built its dwellings and how Rome built its dwellings. And in Rome's case, they open up a lot of their dwellings so that they can show their opulence to other people. And in Greece, the buildings were far more designed to cut off parts of the house so that you couldn't see it from the outside. So it's quite interesting. It's really a case of privacy versus publicity, right? This is kind of an interesting study about tribes that don't have internal walls in their living conditions, right? So they live in a shared environment, compared to tribes that do have private spaces. And what they discovered was that tribes that without private rooms, tribes would prefer to have sex indoors, whereas tribes that didn't have the ability to have sex in a private room would actually go and walk to have their intimate moments. So it goes to show you that the human condition allows us to still try and find a way, though, even though the opportunities are not there. Yay, pooping, because we all want to do that publicly, right? But this is another thing that Rome is very famous for. This is a notion, though, that it's quite bizarre. But this is yet again about access. The access to toilets was a resource, was a commodity. Not everybody had that access to that at home. We're not going to build 440 public toilets just outside so that you can all have one each, right? So they become shared. But the very notion changes. So this is like one of these Roman toilets today. The communal bed. It's very hard to imagine, but the truth is, as a species, we all slept in the same bed for a very, very, very long time. And yet again, this is because the access to individual beds, the cost associated was prohibited. But put this into context. Your guests would come and visit, and they would join you, your wife, your children, and her mother, and their entourage. You all just hop into that same bed. To us today, how alien does this seem? But to them, not so much, right? And it is predominantly about access. What's interesting, though, is that has a small impact in medicine. And what happens in medicine during the Black Death? Before this, patients were all in the same bed. And basically, the de facto rule of thumb was as many patients to a bed as you would feel comfortable with house guests, was their basic rule of thumb, which is a little bit worrying when everyone's got the Black Death and death and death and death, 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 death. Let's all hook up in bed together. And eventually, they worked out that the single bed might be a better option, and this helped massively. But we see this impact as beds become more available. Our notion of the intimate space of the bedroom changes yet again. He's not proposing. I mean, I don't know how you do it in your country, but that's not how we do it in mine. Well, it depends which part of Scotland, to be fair. But this is called the compromise position. And this is an article about giving a gynecological exam in the medical journal and discussing about how someone's privacy can be protected. But it's interesting the terminology that they use in this. The compromise position, like there's some deal that's being made between a doctor and a patient, right? We've compromised, we've made a deal, right? Okay. But medicine is a really interesting place of where the confusion about privacy, secrecy, and intimacy all kind of coexist, right? Privacy in the law. This will be fun. So the law of privacy can be traced back to 1361. In England, anyway. I'm not sure you can find it anywhere else written down. I'm sure there was notions, tribal notions of privacy. But the problem is that where we're limited is tribes and countries that hadn't had a written history, such as the Germans. It's very hard to see what their notions of history were because their history is written by the Romans, right? But in 1361, we see a law come into the British law books specifically about eavesdropping, trying to listen to conversations, and peeping toms. Do you know what a peeping tom is? I take it for granted that you do, but if you don't, peeping tom is someone that's trying to peer through your curtains when you're getting dressed and stuff like that. It's not me, anyway. However, in 1844, the British government gets embroiled in quite an interesting scandal. Now, I know that you guys are not Brits, and I know that I talk a bit about British history. It's because I'm a Brit, sorry, right? But in 1844, there is a massive issue about privacy that happens in the UK, so much so that it makes it all the way to the House of Commons. And it's to do with Giuseppe Mazzini. Put your hands up if you know who he is. I think I saw one person put their hands up. He is an Italian revolutionary, legal scholar, and I think the Italians would call him a patriot too. Not responsible, but very much trying to bring in a unified Italy. It's very kind of cool. But what happens is, and I think it's 1843, he was able to prove that the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom had ordered for his mail to be intercepted, which is quite a damning indictment. So what he does is he believes that his mail is being intercepted. And what he does is he sends 3 letters out, and he puts sand, poppy seeds, and hair in all 3 letters. And he sends his letters off to his friends in European countries, and he sends one of the letters to himself. And when the letter comes back, his letter has no sand, no poppy seeds, no hair inside the envelope. But the other 2 in the other 2 countries do. And this is when he knows that the Brits have been reading his mail. And the reason the Brits have been reading his mail is that this is the request of the Austrian ambassador to the United Kingdom. And what they're very, very worried about is a revolt almost happening in Italy and the consequences that will have in Austria later on. But as we can see, it's quite a serious damning indictment. But what's interesting as well is that the mail is probably one of the most guarded privacy. If you look at laws, there's a lot of laws that protect the sanctity of the mail. This is another example of it. So I don't know why it's gone all freaky there, but okay. This caused such an uproar that the House of Commons had to have a committee of secrecy. And where it was discovered that the Home Secretary not only had been doing this to Mazzini, but they actually had a whole department in the mail, whose specific job was to intercept the mail of troublesome people. And it's interesting because what governments do when they get caught is they go, "Oh, that's terrible, we're going to shut that down. Start a new one right now. Yeah, it's over. Is it open yet? It's over, don't worry." Right? And this is exactly what they do. No, we're going to close the mail reading department. Let's just start an intelligence service instead. Cool. But this is very interesting. So yet again, laws coming into place, not because of any other reason than the government taking advantage of technical changes to be able to intercept people's privacy, right? Jeremy Bantham. I have 2 ideas. I really don't know if I like this guy or not. Put your hands up if you know who this guy is. Wow, really? So you might want to read him up, right? He's kind of cool. But what he's really famous for I'm totally going to kill this pronunciation. Every time I've done it, I've always done it. Panopticon. He's basically the inventor of this concept. And what this is this is predominantly designed to how they deal with prisoners. Beforehand, prisoners tended to take him to the dungeons. You know, you used to store prisoners in basements, in dungeons. The thing is, it's pretty hard to see what your prisoner is up to if he's in a dark hole in the mountain, right? What's he up to? Needless to say, you can't afford to put a guard on every single door, right? So Bantham realized that what he really wants is to have all the cells above ground, well lit, well open, no doors, and a big column in the middle. And right at the top is a guard tower. And you see these little windows at the top. These guards basically have a 360 unrestricted view of all the prisoners. And the idea here is that the prisoners can't see in the guard tower, but the guards can see out of the guard tower. And that means that the prisoners constantly have to live with the concept that they don't know if they are or if they're not being watched. But what they know is they could be being watched, which basically is the notion of 1984, right? So this is a very interesting turning point. I mean, it changes the legal judiciary massively. But this notion, this panopticon notion, gets used in other places far more mentally than physically, right? It's quite interesting. Yay, everyone's watching us, it's brilliant. Privacy in religion. Well, privacy in Christianity would probably be a better way of describing this, right? So, you know, we take privacy, we take religion as a private moment, but this is not something that happens organically. This is something that as a result changes. And what I mean is that doctrine of like silent virtue, of silent reflection, is only something that happens in the Christian church after the invention of the printed press. And the reason that this happens is access to the Bible is quite limited. So religion itself is a publicly shared event. It's a public, because access to Bibles is not around because Bibles are handwritten. They're written in Latin, and not everybody can read. So it means that if you want to engage in religion, you had to do it publicly. This changes when the press comes into play, right? But it's interesting because Christianity has benefited a lot from technological developments throughout the years. But what's interesting about books, religion and mystery go hand in hand, right? Mystery is requiring you to believe in something, which is basically the doctrine of religion, right? But of course, books really love to reveal mystery. That's basically their thing. So they may have made interesting bedfellows to start with, but what we see is a war from there on inwards, right? It's interesting. The sanctity of the confessional is rather interesting too. So we take the idea as a confessional. In most laws, hugely recognized that what is said between a believer and a priest is sacred. Cannot break that. Really the living embodiment of public and private going on in the confessional. However, the confessional wasn't always a private affair. In fact, the confessional was a public affair, done between the whole entire congregation. My guess is nobody did anything wrong, right? Is my guess is what happens at a public confessional. Who's got anything to confess? Nope. Good, I'm fine. But this changes, right? But I can't think of a greater example of the real dynamic change in how we deal with privacy than the Catholic Church and the confessional, right? Very interesting. I know that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try and wrap up, okay? So, the only thing more cherished than privacy is publicity. A wonderful talk by Jill Lepore. If you ever get a chance to see it, just Google, just in YouTube, put something like History of Privacy. It's very interesting. It's the only one that's done anything recent that's worth reading. But the only thing more cherished in privacy is publicity. Well, what do you mean by that? Yay, Facebook. I'll give you a second. When I gave a version of this talk at GERCON in Michigan last year, and in the middle of me putting these slides together, this story popped up on my timeline. The worrying thing is, I'm the one that blanked out all the names. So this is literally in my timeline. For those that can't read it at the back, this is a young lady talking about they were playing with a vibrator in the bedroom, and it went north and needed to have surgery to have it removed from her bowel. And then she decided that she was going to tell the whole entire world about it on Facebook. So this is a couple of hours afterwards. You can see 19 hours afterwards, it has 2,827 shares, right? I'm not one of them. But I don't think anything could... Facebook is a real example of our real want for privacy, but our desperate need for publicity. It's fascinating. Jill Lepore also said, which I thought was quite fascinating, I found it very hard to accept straight away, but the case for privacy comes after, never before the exposure. And this is a really interesting notion that in some ways we have technological developments, and then afterwards we go, holy shit. You know, the printed press is an I've banged on to you guys about the printed press for at least 2 talks, right? It's because I believe it's incredibly important to our species. But if you think about the invention of the printed press, there was some sanctuary in words because not everybody could read. But the printed press allowed universal literacy to become a real thing. All of a sudden, the sanctuary of words couldn't protect you anymore, right? What was said was there. But the case for privacy, as I say, we've done this as well. We claim privacy once the exposure has happened, never before. I can't think of episodes where this is not the case, but she has this really interesting notion that much that was mysterious became secret, and then it became private. I'll let you read the rest, because I don't believe in reading off slides, right? But I'm going to guess when you've read it, right? And if not, just ask the person next to you, and hopefully they're a faster reader than you. Right. I'm going to change. But this could really be summed up as religion, science, and law. God's miracle of life, the science of reproduction. Roe versus Wade. Put your hands up if you know who Roe versus Wade is. Right? There should be a lot more of you putting your hands up. I'm sorry to tell you this. Roe versus Wade. Do you like civil rights? Put your hands up. Right, you guys have to go because we don't like you. Right? But this, Roe versus Wade, is a legal case about abortion. But it has civil rights implications. Roe versus Wade gives us a lot of privacy. Now, yes, it's not a court case in your country, but it's a court case in the super state of the United States of America that has an impact globally on all of us. But this is, I think this sums it up perfectly. Religion, science, and law. Mystery, reveal the mystery, respond to the revelations. Liberty is the right to do what the law permits, as Montesquieu had said, which is kind of interesting because the history of privacy is actually the history of technology versus legality. If you can't find a better resource to find the history of privacy than looking through the law books. Look through your own law books in your own countries, and you'll follow your country's history about the fears that it had with interception, the fears of having privacy taken away with it, and how elected officials responded to it. there's probably no better resource. But from letters and words to sentences and paragraphs, the person's innermost thoughts and desires and fears become public. This is the invention of words that did this for us. So here is my final attempt to define what privacy is. Privacy is just the right to be human. And I'll leave you with Aristotle, because all of this talk today would never have started without Aristotle and the original works in the private and public spheres. And whatever within our power to do lies also within our powers not to do. And I think that we should very much bear in mind this notion going forward in technology, as our impact we always have an impact on people's very privacy. And with that, I think that I've got 10 minutes for questions, so thank you.
And that's awesome, thank you. And we will be able to keep the schedule running, because you used your time well, I think.
I was fast. This is why they all look tired.
No, I think they're fine.
What did he say?
No, we don't want you to speak faster. That's for sure.
Go on then. What's your question?
Yeah. So, what do you think? What do you think that we should strive for? What do you think it's more important? I mean, we can't define privacy, which means it's very hard to achieve, because you can't define it. Do you think that it's more important in that case that we try to define privacy as something that we can achieve? Is it more important with the actual privacy that we can't define, or the feeling that we have privacy?
So I've got maybe two ways of answering this question. Privacy is a lot like dinosaurs, right? It will always find a way. Like Jurassic Park, right? But privacy it will always find a notion within people, because privacy is human. And I don't think there is a problem with defining privacy. I think we just gave up defining privacy. Privacy is quite hard to define, yes, but it's not impossible for us to do it. Look at all the things that we've managed to achieve as a species, and we're going to be beaten by something that's our own emotion. Seems somewhat bizarre to me. But for me, I think privacy is a lot more like a force, more like gravity than anything else, right? The little bits of privacy, once they become bigger and bigger and bigger, have bigger impacts. It's something around us that shapes the world we do. It shapes the things around us. It's more like a universal force than secrecy, than intimacy, right? They're not very.
That's the point. I was thinking it was sort of the same way that privacy is more of a direction than a destination in this case. It's something that we want.
Yeah,
but if it's the direction, we won't ever be there, because you don't reach a direction.
You're always on the journey, right?
So then you can't really say that this is something that we can achieve. Privacy is not something that we
can't
can
have
have.
An attitude like that, right? Huh? We can't with an
No,
attitude like that. Man on the fuck up.
It just feels like privacy becomes this psychosis that we live, that we...
I mean, all I can tell you is that I do believe that if we want to work in privacy, we don't get to say, chaps, it's too complicated, right? I don't think we get to say, we're going to go and make mistakes because it's too complicated for us to understand. Yes, it might be difficult for us right now to get the notions of so on and so forth, but we don't know where the research will go in 100 years' time, in 200 years' time, 20 years' time. History evolves. It's just a living embodiment of us, right, in some ways. So I don't think I can answer the question in the way that you want me to answer it.
Maybe it was just a thought then. Questions from the audience, and do we have microphones running around in the audience now? There's one microphone over there, and there's one person here. Because they're so tight between the chairs, you actually have to help with the microphone and pass it over.
You're never going to win the Olympics like that, right?
So, yeah. I'm called Mem. Isn't that it's hard to define privacy because it's the force and the counterforce? When you have this counterforce with government monitoring you or whatever, what Google is logging or whatever, that's part of the definition of privacy, and so you can't define it. You can define it for a short moment, and then the counter force changes, and then you have to redefine it.
I don't think we'll ever have a static moment with privacy. I don't think that we get to an evolution and that's it, game over. I mean, I just think that it keeps on changing as we keep on changing. And I wouldn't say the counterforce is government or Google or so on and so forth. It's a very nice argument. I hadn't thought about it that way. But I would say that the counterforce is technology, not necessarily organizations. I think you pick on the organizations because they use technology, right? But I think that there's always a push between the two, right? I hope that answers the question somewhat. Okay.
There's one question down here.
You can just throw it at him.
Yeah.
Catch.
Yes, some events do that. You have to line up in a line and you put a microphone out. I think that will be impossible here. Sorry.
Have you sent yourself any poppy seeds or the modern equivalent?
I mean, I would have to write a letter to start off with. And I mean, let's be fair about this. The issue here is that we don't write letters. And it's a great point that you make, because how lucky is Mazzini to have lived in a period of time where he could have detected someone reading his mail. Now look at the notions that you guys have to live today. Where's your cyber poppy seeds and where's your cyber hair and your cyber sand, right? You're not going to be able to pull the same stunt that Mazzini did to find out that, you know, Amber Rudd is reading your emails.
Oh, so this is why sometimes the attachments are missing in my emails.
Yeah, okay. I start sending you emails with like poppyseed.pdf, hair.pdf, sand.pdf. Just let me know if you get them back, right?
Yeah, sometimes it's the checks in the mail version of here's the stuff I promised you. Right there.
Right there in that.
Yeah, your voice is strong enough, I think. No, take the microphone. It's actually going out to the stream as well.
Oh, okay. Then I won't yell. No, sorry. I wanted to ask, is it even possible to achieve privacy as people are fairly oblivious to all the information they're giving away and the extent of where that information will wind up?
Yeah, so my day job is looking at breaches and the impact and the data involved. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The case for privacy comes after the exposure, never before it, right? And in person, Equifax is a great example right now. People are jumping up and down about the data breach. But the truth of the matter is, yes, there is a breach, and yes, that information may be becoming public. But no one was jumping up and down beforehand when Equifax had the data, right? Like, oh, this is bad, they're collecting this data, and then they lost it. It was a little bit late to be talking about this now. It's out there. It's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at how we deal with this. And we do need, as a species, to get our head around that there is two bits of us, the public and the private bit. And we should work very much to protect both sides, because without them, we're just half of what we could be. So yeah, don't give up, but it's a long journey, right? But yeah, I hope that helps. Have we got any more questions?
All right, no more questions. Then in that case, thank you very much, f1nux.
Thank you.